Good afternoon, everyone. Let's see. Okay, my name is Darren Crouch. I'm the president of Passages International, and I wanted to take a few moments just to thank you for joining us for our first of hopefully many continuing the conversation webinars. We're hoping to have one of these approximately every month. We really thought about starting this, I think especially with the COVID-19 limiting travel and limiting funeral directors and cemeterians exposure to the typical means of continuing education. We wanted to create a venue and a forum in which funeral directors and funeral professionals could learn and discuss issues like changes in the profession and the evolving demands of families, how to better align with families and the demands of families, and ideas to provide meaningful choices and experiences for families dealing with a loss. I wanted to share with you the knowledge that we've acquired over the last 20 years, helping funeral homes remain relevant and profitable. Just to kind of give you a quick rundown of the format, I'm not sure if Chris touched on this, but we're looking at a 20 to 25 minute conversational presentation with 5 or 10 minutes for questions and comments and further discussion at the end. Feel free during the presentation to use the chat feature or raise your hand or make any comments or pose questions that we can most likely review at the end. I have time, so if we go over the 25 to 30 minutes, I'm certainly willing to spend some additional time with you. So today we're going to focus mainly on why families are choosing scattering and how you can pivot to better serve their needs. We'll touch briefly on what scattering is and set the scene for our next webinar, which will focus on types of scattering and the products that can facilitate the process. It's not moving. Okay, so a little bit about us. We're known as a company that specializes in biodegradable and eco-friendly products, but I believe we're so much more. We see ourselves as a solution to help funeral homes cater to the evolving needs of families, and in so doing, remain profitable and relevant. We used to talk about the change from burial to cremation, and now cremation is such a huge part of our business that we need to focus on the cremation consumer specifically and how they've changed and how to capitalize on this shift. Cremation consumers have never really been the same as burial consumers. In fact, I believe many families choose cremation because it's an outright rejection of traditional burial. It's not necessarily something they really want per se, but they know what they definitely don't want, which is traditional burial. Today, I'd like to explore briefly what the funeral of today looks like versus the funeral of the past. Look at current data that supports and illuminates why families are making the choices that they're making. Highlight how we as a profession can respond to this, and how we should have responded over the last few years. I'd also like to get you thinking about opportunities you might not have thought of or you might be missing in your businesses. Opportunities that would help you better provide solutions to families, alternatives that would align more with their values, are better for the environment, and ultimately, and probably most importantly, better for your bottom line. We'll also give you some insights on why cremation families intend to scatter. Obviously, as well as I do, times have changed. Probably not much has changed from the image on the left to the image on the right. And this is what a traditional burial has looked like for decades, possibly even a century or more. In many people's minds, there's very little connection with the person that passed. Often people are confused and dazed and distraught. And there's really not much of a celebration or any particular focus on remembering the individual. I think we all know that cremation rates are higher than they've ever been. And I would argue that, the funerals of today look more like this. The image on the left, for example, is a funeral home that helped a family that ultimately did a water burial off the coast of Maui. They invited 50 to 100 of their friends. They purchased 50 keepsakes urns. Everybody wrote on the urn, and then this photo shows what they did. They basically created this very unique, memorable healing celebration that was very well received. Funerals today, obviously, interest in green funerals is at an all-time high. Families are holding on to urns less and less, and scattering, as I'll show you very shortly, has become a very large part of what families are ultimately doing with cremated remains. So let's look at some of the data. As you can see from this pie chart that we extrapolated from the NFDA's consumer survey, preferences survey from 2019, you can see that 48% of families are saying that they intend to scatter. And I think if you look at your businesses, this is going to align pretty closely with what you're seeing in your businesses. I think what's really important to look at here is the parts that don't include scattering. So for example, if we look at the percentage of families that intend to keep their remains at home, or keep them in a place of worship, or inter them at a cemetery, that only accounts for about 25 to 27% of families. And what I'm going to show you later is, if 25 to 27% of families, only that percentage intend to keep the urn, then why are most of our urns that we display and show to families permanent, i.e. bronze, marble, pewter, permanent urns designed for permanent storage? So I also want to reference a consumer survey, or a focus group actually, that the Cana and Homesteaders did. And I think it really gives some insights into why families are doing what they're doing and why they're choosing what they're choosing. And I think one of the most important one is insight number one. And this really explains why people see less value in embalming, in viewings, or in having the body present, because consumers are wanting to celebrate the life and they're wanting to remember the individual. The focus needs to be on the life lived. And what this focus group actually found was that participants are actually avoiding products and services that focus on the body. And to me, there's a huge disconnect between what the industry is providing, what the industry is teaching young funeral professionals in terms of where the value lies. If we spend a lot of time on embalming, setting of features, casketing the body, if we're focusing on that in mortuary school, but families don't see much value in that, then there's this huge disconnect. And so I think it's really, really important to think about, what you're focusing your efforts on. So for example, I know a person here locally that I deal with on quite a regular basis, and she was telling me about a loss in her family. And the funeral director was asking them for the shoes for the deceased. And for her, that seemed like the craziest thing, because obviously the individual is deceased. And it was obviously very important for the funeral directors that this individual was fully dressed and has shoes. But for the consumer, that was an annoyance, an irritant. It's had no value, and they couldn't see the point of it. This person came into the world naked. If they go out without shoes, it's not the end of the world. And it actually became irritating for the family. Obviously, we all know that cremation provides a lot of flexibility. And it also allows for families to keep the deceased with them. So unlike burial, you have to go to the cemetery to visit the grave. With cremation, you can have a keepsake or a piece of jewelry, and you can keep that individual with you. Also, we're a much more transient society, and cremation allows families to take the cremated remains wherever they go, and it also allows them to share cremated remains and conduct different experiences in different places. It provides flexibility in timing, locations, and provides families with many, many other memorialization options. Obviously, cremation provides simplicity. There are far fewer decisions to make, or at least that's the perception of the consumer. It's a shorter process compared to the traditional funeral ritual. And in many people's views, it softens the grief. And the people that participated in this focus group felt that they were very satisfied with the cremation experience and would not have changed the decisions they had made. Obviously, price is important when it comes to cremation, and there are definitely families that do choose cremation because it's less expensive typically. But I believe that if we are able to build value back into the cremation process, consumers will pay. Just as with traditional burial, you might have a family who selects a $2,500 burial with a $700, $800 casket or $1,000 casket. You may also have a family that will choose an $8,000 or $10,000 cremation. So it's not always about the price. Depending if you're able to create value, then I believe families will pay for that experience. I think one of the scariest insights that I see here is the perception that families believe they can do many of the parts of the funeral themselves. And one of the areas they feel that they can't do themselves is obviously cremation of the body itself. And I think if we are reduced to a position where all we are doing is cremating bodies, then that in itself has very little value, and we are only going to be able to charge a certain amount for that service. It's really, really important that we bring families back into the fray so that we are able to build value back in and charge accordingly. Because if all we are going to be doing for families is cremating the body, then that is going to become a commodity, and we are going to be in trouble. So, I think Doug Gober says this really well. He talks about, cremation is not disposition. We equate cremation with burial and let final placement fall right off the table. I think, we need to think, as Doug talks about here, as cremation equating to the embalming process. And we need to be beginning the conversation with cremation, not ending the conversation. So many times I talk to funeral directors, and the impression I get from them is when a family chooses cremation, the first thing that comes to their mind is direct cremation. The second thing that comes to their mind is, I'm not going to sell an urn. The family's just going to default to the minimum container. And the third thing is, I'm not going to make any money. And I think if we look at the cremation process itself as the beginning of the conversation, then we're going to remain relevant, and we are going to be walking side by side with the family through the whole process versus just the disposition of the body, i.e. the cremation itself. So if we make cremation itself the beginning of the conversation, and we don't let the conversation end at the word cremation or the cremation process itself, and we focus on creating an experience that enables families to celebrate the life of the deceased and remember that individual as they lived and not as they lie dead in a casket, we will build value back into the cremation process. I think what's really important is to be asking the question about where would they like to be remembered and how would they like to be remembered. So often with cremation, and particularly with scattering, people want to be remembered at their favorite hunting spot or at their beach house where they used to spend families with their summers with their families. And cremation allows people to do that. There are so many options for cremation. You can do a water burial using something like the turtle that you see here that will allow the cremated remains to be scattered. You can use a biodegradable urn and bury it in the ground. You can select a reef ball or make a piece of jewelry or grow a tree in an urn that will allow the remains to be in the bottom and the tree to grow in the top. So when we look back at the survey and the consumer focus group, you can really see why these options are really, really important for families, and why they will often not spend money for the cremation process itself. But as I showed you with that family that scattered the cremated remains off the coast of Maui, they'll spend thousands and thousands of dollars on other experiences that are meaningful to them. So I want to look at what a traditional urn selection looks like today. This is a very progressive funeral home actually based here in Albuquerque. And you can see from this display, and I think most of you will agree that this is typically what a cremation urn selection looks like. And they've probably looked this way for decades. But if you look at this display, I think you'll agree that if 50% of families are scattering, we definitely don't see 50% of the urns on this display suitable for scattering. Yes, they're progressive, as I mentioned. This funeral home has 35 to 40 different urns, and I would say 6 or 7 of them are designed for scattering. If we were paying attention to the data and they had 40 different urns on display, then it would make sense that about 20 would be used for scattering of some kind, whether it's placing in the water where they biodegrade, placing in the ground, or doing traditional scattering. And I think, you know, what we see here when a family comes in, if they've already decided to scatter, they're not really given very many options to scatter from. So this is what a more contemporary selection would look like. These two photographs show 2 different displays, and they are heavily focused obviously on alternative urns, biodegradable urns that you can place in the water and will biodegrade. On the left, you can see we have a comprehensive selection of scattering tubes because just like with your casket selection room and your brass urns, you know, families want choices. And so it's really important to give people choices. This display, these are actually custom displayed glass shelves with the lighting. This is actually a very expensive display. But now that cremation is 50% of the families that you serve, it makes sense to invest in that demographic of family. It can't be an afterthought. And a display like the one that you see on the right definitely sends the message to families that this is not an afterthought, that you are catering to their needs and have choices for them. So if we look at these displays, you're going to see, as I mentioned, that there are options for scattering in or over land. There are options for scattering in or over water. There are options that you would pour the cremated remains out of. There are options that would allow you to place the whole vessel either in the ground or the water, and it will biodegrade. There's obviously keepsake sizes for allowing families to split the cremated remains and provide the flexibility that I talked about earlier in the presentation. Excuse me. The other thing that we've created with these displays is that there are multiple price points. So there are products on these displays that you could be selling to a family from $75 to $95. There are products that fit between $149 and $199. There are products that fit between $225 and $295. And there are products that go up to $495, $395. And so it gives you some flexibility in terms of if people are on a budget, there are options, dignified, functional, and attractive options for them. If someone wants something more premium, like a piece of art, like a gourd, or something more contemporary, like a biotree urn that you can grow a tree from, then they may pay a $400 or $500 premium for those items. So scattering, obviously, when we think about scattering at the core, it's basically about disposing of cremated remains. And the picture that you see here, I would argue that it's not the perfect way to do it. And I believe that there are many, many more dignified and healing and meaningful and powerful ways to do it. And at Passages, we provide many, many options that will allow families to scatter in a meaningful way. For you, as you're thinking about the scattering process, when people mention that they want to scatter, that should not be, oh, then they're going to only want the plastic box or the cardboard box. Then you should be talking about where they intend to do it, when they intend to do it, how they intend to do it, and then match the product to the experience they're trying to create. And at the end of the day, we are in the urn business, but I understand, and I think it's important for you to understand that if you're able to deliver an experience to a consumer, they're going to pay a premium for that. And the product itself is a means to an end. And funeral directors will often ask me, why would someone pay $400 or $500 for a paper shell or a paper turtle? And my answer is, well, it's not the product that they're paying for, it's the experience, the priceless experience in many events that the person is paying for. We've had families that have purchased one of our turtles from us that you see in this picture here. The funeral director sold it to the family decorated it, the family went out on a boat, placed this turtle in the water, and a real turtle swam up next to the boat or this turtle. And so those types of experiences are priceless, and that family will never forget that experience, and they probably would have paid several $1,000s to have that experience, and that experience was created by the product they purchased to enable them to do that. But I also want to talk about the basic cardboard box. I've talked about, deferring and kind of just accepting that families that choose cremation or tell you they're going to scatter are not going to want anything beyond a plastic or a cardboard box. And I think we can do better, and I think you'll agree that we can do better. And really, we started our company 20 years ago to do better, because we had my partner and I, who started the business, he was working in an affluent funeral home in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and he had people showing up in S-Class Mercedes. And no matter how they merchandised product, no matter what selection they gave families, no matter how they priced them, families were still selecting a cardboard box. And it was really because we weren't providing them with options that they wanted to purchase to help them achieve the experience they wanted to achieve. And what we found is, by offering families different products at different price points that are designed differently and function differently, and if you ask and engage families with what they are interested in doing, they will purchase many of these products, even if it's only a $75 or a $95 scatter tube, but many of them will buy up to a handmade paper turtle, for example. And I think one of the most important things that you can take from this presentation is really the plastic and cardboard box has no place in this business. You'll have families that'll come in, they'll spend $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 with you, and they'll go home to the rest of their family. They'll put the plastic box on the kitchen table and the invoice from you for $3,000, and everybody else at the kitchen table will go, "My God, who did you deal with that we spent $3,000 with, and they gave us grandma in a plastic box?" There are better ways. And we need to move away from the plastic box. The plastic box cannot be our standard of care. There are so many better ways to honor the deceased than a plastic or a cardboard box. So obviously we need to catering to the consumers in your market. And we've talked about families wanting to honor their loved one. And in many occasions that's very specific to potentially the market you are in or another market where they intend to travel to. And it's really important to set up your displays to match the environment and the demographic that you serve. So for example, if you were a funeral home in Miami, Florida, and you're surrounded by ocean, you may want to have a lot of products that are designed to be used for scattering over the ocean, or that can be placed in the ocean and will biodegrade naturally over time. If you're in the Rocky Mountains, you may want a scatter tube that has a mountain view scene on it, or you may want to have some urns that can be buried in the woods and will biodegrade naturally right next to that favorite hiking spot or that favorite fishing spot or hunting spot. And again, if you remain engaged with the consumer, you're going to know this information, be able to be a resource and a guide for them to help them move through this process. And of course, we all know that's where the value comes in. Many years ago, we know that, caskets were the main driver of revenues. And over the years, we've moved away from that towards service. And it's really, really important that we move back in that direction as well, and function sort of as event planners where we can create any event we want for a family, just as a wedding planner would. 25, 30 years ago, people were getting married and it was mostly in a church or a hotel or at a country club. Now it's on the beach or at a VRBO or all kinds of different things. And it's really important that we remain engaged with the consumer to stay in touch with their needs. So, we'll talk more about creating meaningful experiences in upcoming continued conversation webinars. We'll also talk more about products that you can use to achieve some of these experiences. But I think I'm at about my 25-minute limit here. And so I wanted to wrap up. So thank you very much for taking the time. I'm hoping that this time works well for you versus an hour. If you feel like you want it shorter or longer, please let us know, because we want to, work within the constraints that you have. But please, if you need help with merchandising, with marketing, with pricing, with product selection, please feel free to reach out to us. Please also tell your friends and colleagues about this if you felt it was helpful. Share and follow us on social media. And just to kind of give you an update, our next webinar was going to be on August the 11th. And it's going to cover water scattering options for families and funeral homes. And we'll be providing you with more information on that in the coming weeks. So I will end it there. And if anyone has any questions, I'll open it up for any questions or any discussion.
No, Nicole Smith said this was wonderful. Thank you. Just thank you, comments.
Great. So I'll stay on the line. If anyone has any further comments or questions, I'm happy to answer them. But again, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I know it's crazy out there, and I appreciate you investing a little bit of time and energy in some further education and hopefully some new ideas.